Hi, this is Bill Berry with an introduction to our single table queries topic. This is a very important topic for us since if you work in a database environment, it is very typical that you would do querying most of the time, so we need to really cover this well. Also, we're going to cover it for a couple of weeks because we'll start with single table queries and then switch over next week to talk about multiple table queries, and this topic will keep coming up in some small ways throughout the quarter. So we definitely need to focus on this and really learn the basics of querying. So do know that we're not going to cover everything that we would cover in class. We will, for instance, in class do some challenge exercises together, and so those answers will not be here. Let's jump in and learn the basics, and then we'll get right into our querying. First thing that we're going to do is we're going to talk about some useful syntax, some things that you need to know to get started. Then we'll focus on the select command, and then along the way there's also some other good stuff that we're going to learn, some special ways that SQL can do things that maybe you wouldn't see in other kinds of languages. So let's jump in. First thing that we need to know here is that we want to understand what syntax descriptions are trying to communicate to us. When you program in programming languages, you need to know this, and the same thing here in SQL. There are times when we need to describe the syntax of the command. We're not writing the command out, but we're writing the requirements of the command. So when you see a syntax description, you will see certain kinds of artifacts, certain kinds of notations that you should be aware of. First thing is, if you see something in uppercase, it means that you need to type it the exact way that it's shown. Spell it the same way that it is here, S-E-L-E-C-T. You don't have to do it in uppercase because SQL is case insensitive, though as we've maybe discussed, it's a good idea to capitalize all keywords because it's sort of conventional in SQL to see that. So uppercase, type it the way it is, don't get creative with your spelling. If you see something in lowercase, perhaps in angle brackets, that is a good sign that we should fill in the blank with something that makes sense in our context. So after we say the word select, we would put in a select list, whatever that is. We'll understand more about that later. The next thing that you'll see is square brackets. And if you see square brackets in a syntax diagram, syntax description, that means that you may optionally include that if you need it. So in this case, optionally, you can say from and then provide a table source. If you don't want to say it, don't. Sometimes it'll be necessary, sometimes it won't. Same thing in here, where and then a condition. Then optionally order by followed by an order by list. So a syntax description, if you understand it, really communicates a lot about how you build the commands. We'll get fancier later, so I'll give you some other descriptions in another lecture. The other thing that we want to know here is that in the select clause, you must have the clauses within the select command in the proper order. There's a little acronym that a student came up with that I really like, and so it's stuck. Here it is, San Francisco, where groovy hippies originate. You must put these select command clauses in the proper order, and here's the order. S is for San, here's the select. Then comes from, then where, then group by, having, and order by. We're not going to cover all these tonight. Group by and having will come at a later date. If we get to the lectures on summary queries and subqueries, those things will pop back in. But otherwise, we're going to really focus on the others that are listed here. A couple of useful commands, a couple of useful things to know. First is, if you need to, in addition to the table name, you can always prepend the database name and a dot. So there may be some circumstances where you need to do that, right? So to qualify something, you prepend the name of the thing just bigger than it in the hierarchy. So in this case, the table name can be preceded by the name of the database and then a dot. Usually we don't have to do that because we've set our default, so we don't care. But to set the default so that we don't usually need that, we can do one of two things. You either double click the database in the schema, which I showed you in class, or you can use the use command, which is you put the word use and then you follow it by the database name. So in this case, use OM is the order management sample database. Another thing that we studied in class, as a reminder, you can describe a table to list its structure, its definitions, its column definitions. So if you want to, you can say desk or describe followed by the table name, and then you will see that structure laid out. You can also use the schema explorer when you're doing that. That's another way if you don't want to list it this way. Another thing that we need to know how to do is to write comments. For various reasons, while you're doing your work, you may want to comment on your own work so that you remember why we were doing certain things in class. You can do that starting with a pound sign. So if you put a pound sign, everything from there to the end of the line is considered to be a comment. You can also do dash dash space. Don't forget the space because the dash dash is not enough by itself. So dash dash space, and then everything from there is considered a comment and will be ignored by Workbench and SQL. Now, the other thing that you can do is do a multi-line comment, and this is very much of a C and Java kind of comment. So you can start with a /* and end with a */. And everything that goes in between is considered to be a comment. These things may not much make sense to you when you first see them, but if you look at your number keypad, they're right next to each other, and that kind of makes sense. You go left to right to start and right to left to come back. So that's just a little bit about comments. In class, I talked about a couple of these. If you want to execute the current command, it's very convenient, to me at least, to use Control-Enter. You can also use the lightning bolt with the little I-beam cursor on it. If you want to execute the whole script top to bottom, you don't make a selection. You just, anywhere you happen to be, if you do Control-Shift-Enter, that will execute the entire script top to bottom. Control-S, of course, will save. Once you've saved your script into a .sql file, you can do Control-S to save it again. That's a good idea to save your work, and Control-T to open a new tab to work in. If yours gets busy or you want one for each week, for instance, then you do Control-T to make a new tab. Next, we need to talk about literals. What is a literal? A literal is a piece of data that SQL is going to understand with no explanation from you and no interpretation required. It just understands them innately. So for instance, when we're talking about a number, if you are looking for, customer numbers or phone numbers or whatever, if you're looking for something with the number 3, you just put the number 3 or 5.8. So when you're discussing numbers, you don't adorn them. You don't put anything around them, delimit them, right? Nothing goes around them. You just say the number. If you want to discuss text, if you want to say I'm looking for a customer whose name is Barnes, or somebody whose first name is Bill, or you're looking for the title of a textbook, User Guide to the World, whatever, you put those in apostrophes. Notice that we don't use quotation marks. The quotation marks are very common in other languages. We don't use them here. Only single quotes, please. That's hard to get used to, I know. The other thing is for dates. We will use a lot of dates in SQL. Note the specific format that we use here. You're going to start and end with an apostrophe, which makes it text, and then you're going to put a very specific date format. You're going to put the year first, then a dash or a slash, then the month, then a dash or a slash, and then the day. So year, month, day in order. So that's something that we'll use a lot too. We can also use true or false. I'm not sure during this course we'll tend to use the Booleans a lot that way, more when you get into the programmatic aspects, but you can use them and they don't need any adornment, any delimiters. You just write the word true or false. So that's a little bit about literals. In terms of arithmetic operators, all of the things work like you would expect, like you learned in math, multiplication, division, just like Excel, right? Times and divide. If you want to do integer division rather than resulting in a floating point number, you can say div. That's a little bit interesting. Also, there is a modulo, which is a percent sign. That takes the remainder of something, right? What's left over after even division, modulo. That's more useful than you might think. In programming world, it's underrated, right? There's neat stuff that you can do with it. And addition and subtraction, these all come in the order of precedence that you would expect. Some of you might have learned Please Excuse My Dear Aunt Sally or BODMAS, however you learned it. Those rules of precedence apply here. Not only that, but everything, as in programming languages, has its own precedence. So if you really want to get specific, you're not going to be tested on this, but if you really, really want to know, this will tell you what is the highest and lowest precedence that you deal with. So that's a little information about that. Now we're going to get into the select statement next, but I'm going to chop the video here because I don't want these to get too long. So that's the kind of intro, the setup for things that we might want to do and might want to know before we actually start with the select. But next is the actual select statement. So let's stop here. Please continue with the next video.